Longtime listeners of this program will know that, actually, there's two sort of like of my bailiwicks today. The Postal Reform Act reverses the 2006, I can't remember what the name of the act was, moved primarily by Republicans, although everyone was on board to more or less, to some extent. A bill in 2006, a law that forced the Postal Service to fund its health care for retirees 75 years out. So in other words, it had to fund health care for people who will work at the post office who are not even born yet. There is no government agency, no private business, no NGO. There is no entity in the world that has that type of requirement. It caused the Postal Service to be in the red, I guess is what they call it, right? When you don't have, when you're running a deficit for years of billions of dollars. That has been fixed. And my understanding is, and the people are looking at that, the postal banking is protected within that act. I'm also hearing somebody's headphones. So if you, wherever that sound's coming from, we got to just take care of that. And then this other story, this other bailiwick of mine has been lead and the unintended consequences of things like lead gasoline. And on some level, this is an interesting analogy to what we're going to be talking about with Jesse Singer. As you know, in this country, leaded gasoline was outlawed largely around, I think it was 1972 when it was outlawed? I think there was different places. I can't remember what it was nationally, but in different locales. There's a new study that has shown that over 170 million US born people who were adults in 2015 were exposed to harmful levels of lead as children. Researchers used blood lead level, census, and leaded gasoline consumption data to examine how widespread early childhood lead exposure was in the country between 1940 and 2015. So children born in the U.S. between 1950 and 1981 had blood lead levels higher than the CDC threshold. In other words, they had lead poisoning. Researchers found significant impact on cognitive development. On average, early childhood exposure to lead resulted in a 2.6 point drop in IQ. Now, IQ isn't necessarily the best measure of intelligence. We know that. But when it's measured against itself, it becomes a way of measuring. It's also an easier one. But we also know that there were massive crime drops across the country, and in fact, this tracks internationally, 20 years out from where lead gasoline was banned. I mean, this is fascinating. And incidentally, and this is, we're seeing this in the context of Flint, right? Where there was massive lead poisoning from the water, where you have an explosion of special needs education requirements in Flint because it affects child development, it affects brain development, it affects brain functioning, and not just in the moment, but years and years later. And I don't know if we'll ever know, but if you accept, well, there is a correlation, 20 years out, drops in crime across the country, internationally, wherever. But if you accept a causal connection between crime and lead exposure, there's a whole spectrum of behavior that exists between not having a lead exposed brain and one that leads to criminal or antisocial behavior. Atrios over at Eschaton posted, he said, he doesn't think that young people understand how much of bar fights, the existence of bar fights was a regular thing when we, people our age, were in our 20s. And I just assumed it was still the same thing, but I just figured, I'm not in that scene anymore, so I don't know about it. But when I was, in my 20s or late teens, frankly, walking to a bar in Worcester, Mass, it was like it was an aggro fest. It was like, could I get out of here without getting beat up? And it was just every type of bar. Newbury Street in Boston was like just a rolling brawl every weekend. And it was all people in their early 20s. And apparently it's not like that anymore. And so it speaks to a couple of issues. One is the unintended consequences. And certainly the people understood the implications of lead. We've gone through that. They understood. I mean, the houses, the factories where lead was used were considered literally madhouses. But it also speaks to externalities and who pays the price for things that create profit for other people. That's basically the theme in many respects of Jesse Singer's book, Accidents, The Deadly Rise of Injury and Disaster, Who Profits and Who Pays the Price. We will get to that in just a moment.